Auntie, please, I am begging you, do not let her eat that food. What is it? Tell me now. What is in that bottle? The soup. Mama Uche brought it this morning. She sent everybody out before she put it down. She has been doing it every day since my sister gave birth. Go back inside. Say nothing to anyone, not even your sister.
The morning Ngozi's sister, Adaku, arrived from Lagos. She found her lying in the hospital bed, looking like someone who had been sick for a long, difficult year, rather than someone who had just given birth 5 days ago. Adaku stood at the door of that private room in Enugu and felt something cold move through her chest. This was not normal recovery. She had seen women come back from cesarean sections before. Tired, yes. Sore, yes. But not like this. Not with this particular kind of fading. Ngozi's lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes were glassy and distant. There was a fine trembling in her hands that had not been there when Adaku last saw her 3 weeks before the baby came. The room smelled of pepper soup and something underneath the pepper soup that Adaku could not name but did not like at all. "Ne, you look pale," Adaku said, sitting beside her and taking her hand carefully. Ngozi managed a weak smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am just tired. The doctor said my body is taking time to adjust." "How long have they been saying this?" 4 days now." Adaku looked slowly around the room. There was a flask on the table near the window, a bowl, a spoon placed neatly beside it, the remains of a meal already eaten. She looked at her sister's face again and then back at that flask and felt the cold thing in her chest grow heavier. Who brought that food? Ngozi's eyes shifted slightly before she answered. "Mama Uche. She has been coming every morning. She says it is her duty as the grandmother to make sure I eat well and recover fast." Adaku nodded slowly. She did not say what she was thinking. Not yet. Adaku remembered Mama Uche very well. She remembered the way that woman looked at Ngozi on the wedding day, not with warmth, not with tearful pride of a mother gaining a daughter, but with the tight, controlled smile of someone tolerating an outcome they had not chosen and had not accepted. She remembered how Mama Uche had pulled Chukwuemeka aside at the traditional introduction and said, loudly enough for Adaku to hear, that Ngozi was too quiet, too independent, too much of her own person for a woman marrying into a family that had certain expectations. She remembered how Ngozi had laughed it off afterward and said every mother-in-law started that way and softened with time. Adaku had not laughed. She had filed it away in that quiet part of her memory where she kept things she hoped she would never need. She stayed in the room all morning and watched. Around 11 a.m., Mama Uche arrived. She came in smelling of kitchen smoke and perfume, carrying a fresh flask wrapped in a small towel, her Ankara wrapper tied high and firm the way older Igbo women tied it when they meant serious business. She greeted 2 nurses in the corridor with loud, generous energy. She swept into the room, saw Adaku sitting there, and her smile did not shift even slightly. "Adaku, my daughter, you have come all the way from Lagos. God bless your travel. God bless you." "Good morning, Mama," Adaku said, watching. Mama Uche set the flask down and began talking about the baby's nose, about how he had Chukwuemeka's exact forehead, about how hospital food was designed for people with no home training and a real mother-in-law would never allow her son's wife to eat such things. She talked warmly and continuously, the devoted grandmother filling all corners of the room with her presence. Then, after perhaps 20 minutes, she said she needed to use the bathroom and Adaku kindly to please go and check on the baby in the nursery down the hall. Such a simple request, said with such a kind face, such a reasonable thing to ask. Adaku felt the cold thing in her chest turn sharp. She stepped out. She walked toward the nursery. She counted to 15. Then she stopped, turned around quietly, and came back to stand just outside the room door, which had not been fully pulled shut. She looked through the narrow gap. Mama Uche was not walking toward the bathroom. Mama Uche was standing at the table with her back turned to the door, one hand in her bag, doing something deliberate and practiced with the flask before she began pouring the soup into the bowl. Her movements were quick and efficient, not the movement of a woman preparing food with love, the movement of a woman completing a task she had performed before and expected no witnesses for. Adaku stood in that corridor and felt the world rearrange itself around her. She waited. She breathed. She walked back in calmly as though she had been to the nursery and returned. She smiled at the baby being brought in by a young nurse. She sat down. She watched Mama Uche carry that bowl to Ngozi's bedside and set it down with both hands and look at her daughter-in-law with eyes so full of tender concern that anyone watching would have wept at the devotion of it. The moment Mama Uche said her goodbyes and left that room, Adaku moved to her sister's side. "Don't eat it." Ngozi frowned. "Adaku, I said do not eat it. Do not touch that bowl. Just look at me and talk to me and pretend everything is normal." "What are you?" "Ngozi, look at me. Trust me right now, please." Her sister went quiet. She looked at Adaku's face, and whatever she saw there made her push the bowl aside without another word. Adaku waited until she was certain no one was coming back. Then she took the small perfume bottle from her handbag. She had emptied it in the bathroom earlier without knowing why, some instinct she had not yet named, and she carefully poured a portion of the soup into it and sealed it and put it deep into her pocket. She found Nurse Amara at the station at the end of the corridor. She had spoken to this woman only twice in 3 days, but something about her, the directness of her gaze, the way she listened without interrupting, the quiet authority she carried without announcing it, had settled something in Adaku from their first conversation. She told her everything, quietly, completely. She described what she had seen through the door, the pattern of daily visits, Ngozi's strange declining condition that the doctors could not explain. Then she placed the bottle on the counter between them. Nurse Amara looked at the bottle. Then she looked at Adaku for a steady moment and said, "Go back inside. Say nothing to anyone, not even your sister." She picked up the bottle, closed her fingers around it, and walked away without hurrying. The results came back before evening prayers. Adaku was sitting beside Ngozi talking about nothing. The baby's feeding schedule, the weather in Lagos, small safe things. When she saw Nurse Amara appear at the door, the nurse's face had gone completely still, in the particular way that faces go still when they are holding something enormous and cannot afford to drop it. Behind her was a senior doctor Adaku had not seen before, and a woman in plain clothes who showed a small card at the entrance and walked in without signing the visitor register. Adaku stood up slowly. The woman in plain clothes asked quietly for non-medical visitors to step out. Adaku looked at her and did not move. The woman assessed her for a moment and then let her stay. What they told Ngozi that evening, carefully, slowly, with the doctor holding her hand and choosing each word with the precision of someone diffusing something, was that the food she had been consuming for 4 consecutive days contained a substance with no business being in any human meal. Substance that would announce itself. Not something that would cause a dramatic collapse or an obvious emergency. A substance chosen specifically because it worked slowly and quietly, mimicking post-surgical complications, designed to look like a body simply failing to heal, producing an ending that would be mourned but never questioned. Ngozi did not scream when she had this. She did not collapse or demand to know more immediately. She lay very still and looked at the ceiling of that Enugu hospital room for a long time, while her newborn son breathed softly in the cot beside her, and her sister held both her hands without speaking, and Nurse Amara stood at the door like someone who had done the most important thing of her career and was still standing. Then Ngozi turned her head and said very quietly, "She held my baby this morning before she left. She picked him up and held him." That was when the tears came. And once they started, they did not stop for a very long time. Mama Uche was taken from her home in Akwa 2 days later, in the early morning before the neighborhood was fully awake. Chukwuemeka received the call in Port Harcourt, where he had been working, and sat in his hotel room without moving for 4 hours. He did not call his brothers. He did not call his uncles. He got into his car alone and drove to Enugu and walked into that hospital room and stood at the door looking at his wife sitting up in bed, stronger now, color returning to her face since the monitored feeding began, and he could not find a single word that fit the size of what he had to carry. He crossed the room. He knelt beside the bed. He did not ask for forgiveness because he understood clearly that there are categories of wound for which forgiveness is not the first conversation. He knelt and he stayed there in the full weight of his failure. Not the failure of doing it, but the failure of not seeing it, of leaving her in the care of a woman he should have watched more carefully, of traveling and providing and being absent in the one way that had almost cost everything. His son slept through all of it, innocent and complete, breathing steadily, with no knowledge of how close the world had come to handing him a different story entirely. The legal process moved the way processes involving respected family names always move in Nigeria, with friction, with delays, with phone calls being made to people who knew other people. But Nosamara had documented every step from the moment that perfume bottle landed in her hand. She had followed protocol with the kind of thoroughness that comes from a woman who has watched too many things get buried and decided a long time ago that nothing would be buried on her watch. Nothing was buried. Ngozi's name became the kind of name that changes register when it enters a room. The kind of name attached to a story that grandmothers tell daughters-in-law, not as gossip, but as warning. The kind of story that travels through Igbo communities the way certain rivers travel. Underground for a while, then suddenly everywhere. Impossible to stop and impossible to pretend you have not heard. The family compound in Akwa, which had always been a place of gathered noise and celebration, went quiet in a way that compounds go quiet when something has broken at the foundation. Relatives stopped visiting. Chukwuemeka's younger brothers stopped calling. The family name, which meant something specific in that community for 2 generations, now meant something else entirely. And there was nothing anyone could do to change that because the evidence was documented, witnessed, and beyond any argument. Ngozi healed. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, then completely. She and Chukwuemeka moved into a flat on the other side of Enugu, away from the compound, away from the extended family, away from every person and place that carried the fingerprints of what had happened. Whether that marriage rebuilt itself fully across the years that followed is a question that belongs only to the 2 of them and the 4 walls they chose together. Neither of them ever answered it for anyone standing outside those walls. What was never uncertain for a single day was Adaku, the sister who traveled from Lagos on a feeling she could not explain and would not have been able to defend, who stood outside a hospital room door on a quiet morning in Enugu and watched through a narrow gap and seen something that changed everything, who poured soup into a perfume bottle with hands that were shaking but decided anyway, who walked toward a nurse she barely knew and placed a small bottle on a counter and said, "Here," because love sometimes looks exactly like doing the terrifying thing before fear has time to vote. And Nosamara, who received that bottle from a stranger, who looked into that stranger's eyes and measured what she saw there and made a decision that no manual had prepared her for and no supervisor had authorized, who documented everything and protected everything and stood at that door afterwards like someone who had simply done what the moment required and expected no parade for it. Some people arrive in a story for only a moment. A corridor, a counter, a bottle passed between 2 pairs of hands, but that moment is load-bearing. Remove it and everything above it collapses. every happy ending that follows, every breath the baby takes, every morning Ngozi wakes up and watches her son grow, all of it rests on that one moment between two women who did not fully know each other, but knew exactly what was right. They were that moment, and because of them, Ngozi lived to tell it. If this story stayed with you, do these 3 things right now. Subscribe and turn on your bell notification. We drop new stories every week and you do not want to miss a single one. Like this video. It takes 1 second and it tells us to keep bringing you stories that matter. Comment below. Have you ever had a feeling that something was deeply wrong and you were right? Or has someone ever showed up for you in a moment you did not expect? Tell us. We read every comment. Share this video with one person who needs to hear this story today. You never know whose life a story can reach. Welcome to Gracious Folktales, where every story is real, every lesson is earned, and nobody leaves the same way they came in. We will see you in the next one.